coming today. This is our fourth episode of Indiana Behavior Association's new little podcast YouTube diary that we are calling Cease and Desist, at least for the time being. I want to say I am open to changing that name in the future if and when our industry's reached a point that the name change is warranted. But until then, we're going to keep it. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about best practices, primarily within the behavior management realm, but not entirely. A lot of it's going to be waiver world globally, but also, there's a lot of BCs in here today. So we're going to specify a lot of our best practices and things that are happening, that we want to happen, that we want to stop happening. And we'll go through a range of topics today. So, stick around and enjoy. Before we get started, one thing that I would like to do is address last week's episode 3. That was a hot and heavy episode. And since that episode, I will say that I have received a ton of phone calls, some emails, some text messages, but mostly phone calls. People calling me from all over, behavior consultants, agency owners, in support of what we're doing. I received a lot of feedback. Probably 4 or 5 days after we uploaded, people started to watch and got a hold of me and started to share their own experiences, their own stories, times that they received cease and desist, times that they received retaliatory complaints. And now, we're starting to hold further dialogues. More people are kind of coming together, and we're starting to have group discussions as far as, what are we all collectively experiencing? So it's been really good. I did get one angry email, which is fine. We all have our opinions. Clearly, I'm here with mine. But overall, it's been an overwhelming amount of support. And I want to thank everybody for reaching out. The comments are helpful, and the emails and the phone calls have reassured, the association and what we're doing, that we are, treading towards a difficult and dangerous path, but a necessary path. And so I think it really helped reinforce our mission here. So thank you for everybody. And, we look forward to many, many more episodes. Okay, so moving on to today's episode, I would like our panel to introduce themselves, tell us who you are and what you do, and then we will dive in today.
Hello, I'm Nicole Vester. I am a Medicaid Waiver case manager and supervisor. I've been in this field for over a decade, and look forward to conversation today.
Hi, my name is Sabrina Starr. I'm a behavior consultant and have been for about 5, almost 6 years, but I have worked in the disability community for almost 10. I'm excited to be here today.
And I'm Jennifer Hersig. I'm a BC with SBS here in Hamilton County.
And don't forget co-host.
And co-host.
Jennifer didn't know that she was going to be the co-host when she first started agreeing to be on these.
Yeah,
but that's how I do it. I like to just slowly rope her in. So right. Sabrina, Nicole, thank you for being here today. I am excited to talk about these topics and bringing this group together to go into this. So beginning with you, Nicole, when I throw out the topic of best practices, what's your initial thought? What comes to your mind when somebody says, hey, let's talk about best practices in this industry?
This is one of my favorite topics because we hone in on this so much with case management, but that trickles down, of course, into providers such as behavioral management. And that's related to, we understand compliance, right? Like we understand what the bare minimum is. And not to say that there's anything wrong with compliance, but if we're striving towards best practices and best practices related to our admin work, our service delivery, just our overall credence of operations for the individuals we support, then we are having the greatest change that we can offer individuals.
I like your definition. You make me feel like the whole thing. Yeah.
It's big. It's a big topic.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I think we're going to try to chip away at some of the pieces because admittedly, my idea was a little bit more narrowed than yours. It's more like a few specific things. And no, that's great. Yeah. I love that. I took some notes, so I'm going to come back to a few things.
Okay.
Sabrina, you get to follow that up though. So go ahead.
What a great opportunity for me to follow up on. When I think of best practice, I think of not only what we can do as clinicians, but what is best for the client. So not what's best for the company, not what's best for or what's easiest for me to do, but what is the best possible outcome for each individual client, and how do I help them get there?
Fair enough. That sounds like the epitome of person-centered.
Very
That was a
good.
That was a good follow-up. Jennifer, what is your initial thought when somebody, especially like myself, is always annoying you with complaints about best practices? What comes to mind when you hear that?
I think for me, best practices really is being present, like this, making a difference. Like that is what it is for me. I have a family member who has autism, and I always come back to think about him and I want his services to be the best they can be. And so whenever I walk into a home, I'm always thinking about that in the back of my mind of, how am I going to help here today? How am I going to make a difference? And so for me, that's, I know that's probably not coming down to the nitty gritty of deadlines and paperwork and that kind of stuff, but whether or not we're actually making a difference in the person's life, whether it's just the individual or the family as a whole. But then just coming back to Nicole's comment, which was kind of almost like that team perspective and group perspective, communication, we have to work together. We don't all have just our one single spot that we do on the team, and then we're on our own. We work together as a group. And so that's an important part of that as well.
You hear that, Nicole? You're sparking some ideas
Yeah.
and some further thought, and even in myself, because one of the things that I do when we do these is I take notes, because I want to broaden and further our interpretation across the industry and our understanding of best practices, because I don't have the answer, but I think if we bring enough of us together, we can find, good answers. Because when I think about best practices, now we're talking about the individual support team, the IST. So the best practices of a team, the best practices of an individual practitioner, whether it's, our discipline of behavior management or music, rec, DSPs, residential, all the stuff. So that's interesting. We're going to break some of that down. The next question, right? Those are your initial reactions. The next question is a fun one. And we're going to start with you again, Nicole. When it comes to best practices, do you have anything that initially comes to mind that stings, makes you cringe? When you think about things that are currently happening in our industry, and you don't have to be too specific, but is there anything that you're just this needs to be way different, way better across the board?
Well, I'll give you sort of more of a broad scope of that, and just that it is such a subjective concept sometimes, best practices. So where I think best practices should begin, at least, maybe not where they end, other people's definitions, it's just not a ubiquitously understood concept. And so that can create some misunderstandings, which then sort of trickles down. So I think specifically my maybe this is not the definition of best practice, but I think it's just let me dial that back in. My concept of best practice does not align with everyone's, and I think that's really the understanding to where it needs to be flexible too, because just because it's not my best practice does not mean it's not best practice.
Interesting. Flexible, so more abstract than concrete.
Yeah, I think it is. I think there are some there's clearly admin best practices. We know that if you case note or document within 24 hours, that is a best practice model. But practicing, being a practitioner or a clinician, that can look a little different depending on that person and the individual themselves and their needs, because not everyone fits into a box that says, oh, well, because this person, has however tantrums are defined, in the community, another person who has tantrums, it might look totally different, so really molding that and whatever the best practice and the delivery of those services, however they look. So again, going back to that person-centeredness of that concept.
This is going to be fun. And you all will help me with this because I am more of a concrete person. You know what I mean? Tell me where to go, how you want me to get there, and I'll just do that. And then I did it, right?
Yeah.
I got to the location. I went via the route you gave me. I'm here. And so some of the ambiguity and the flexibility, I agree, has to be there, but that's the part that's harder for me. And so I'd love for all of us to break down some things. Like I made a little chart on my paper here. What are some things in best practices that we would consider to be more flexible and some that are more concrete? Sabrina, you're up.
Well, when you asked that last question, I wrote down autistic confirming or disability affirming. So instead of approaching clients with how do I get my client to change to seem more neurotypical or functional in their environment, my question becomes, how can I help my individual change their environment to fit their functioning needs and their functioning level?
Nice.
That definitely feels like the flexible side.
That feels like the flexible side to me. I don't ever want to approach somebody and say, how can I make you seem as typical or normal as possible? But how can I make your environment work for you so that you're successful?
That feels more like the compliance model.
Trying to conform them to our environments, right? And yeah.
Yeah, and I think Jennifer, you and I came up in a time when like the compliance model was significantly more prevalent, and in these later years, we've been, as an industry, as clinicians, we've been headed away from, right? Instead of focusing our interventions on do this way, kind of like what I'm used to, right? Tell me where to go, what road to take, and I'll get there. I'm used to that concrete, and in a roundabout way, it's kind of like compliance. So Sabrina, you're saying that's more of a flexible side. Okay, Jennifer?
I started off in ABA and was very
okay.
much taught compliance training.
Yep.
Get our individuals to comply.
That's absolutely that world.
Yes,
Right.
and that changed significantly moving into the waiver world for me. But it's out there. It's out there.
I'm gonna vote that was probably a good change.
It was a good change. It was a good change.
Jennifer, what would you say on the concrete side? Something come to mind for you that you think is more of a concrete best practice, and it doesn't have to fall in line with like modifying the environment. It can just be whatever comes to mind.
I guess for me, when I think of concrete practices, is that we're basically sticking with all of our deadlines. Our paperwork is done. We have our behavior plan in place. Like, people know the behavior plan, and I think that that's some of the pieces that fall through the cracks with us sometimes, is that we write the behavior plan and that we need to make sure that people understand it and know how to execute it, because we're only there once a week. And so we can't work with them every single day to make sure they know it. So like making sure staff or family or whoever's working on it understands those strategies and knows how to use them. Because that's really where that change is going to come from. I mean, we can provide the information, but 1 hour a week, I mean, so I know sometimes we're there more often, but 1 hour a week, we're not going to.
That's our typical, do
a ton, yeah.
Don't let me forget. I want to come back, Jennifer, to staff training. Don't let me forget that. But before we touch on that, I want to jump to Nicole, because you're a case manager and you just heard, like things like document compliance. So in the waiver world, and even if you want to just BCs, even, I'll let you decide. When documentation compliance comes up, what's your perspective of that? Raw and
this is a
uncut.
sore. This can be a sore topic.
I know, and that's why we need to, right?
See, this is where this is a concrete topic. We know what compliance is for deadlines, for case management, for behavioral documentation. We know it. Now, what I'll see is a conglomerate of a couple things. I'll see incomplete documentation. And the problem with that for us from case management is, we are tasked with that congruency of documentation being present. And so, a lot of what we do is hunting BCs sometimes down and other providers with signatures, making sure individual signatures are on. I just had one that the BC's signature was not on the staff training log, and then therefore a transition was denied because that signature wasn't there. So there are some very strict compliance things. And so a lot of what I see is that documentation standard isn't being held necessarily I mean, it's a lot of hit and miss. I don't have percentages. I don't even want to know the percentages, quite honestly, but it's a
Fair.
lot of hit and miss. It is a lot of time absorption with case managers reviewing document libraries from all providers regarding meeting compliance standards.
I definitely, even on this side of it, and I've failed to ever figure out why. And Jennifer, you've been around, right, with me. Tell me if you've got a better insight, but like, I don't know why. And that's probably, I think that's part of my concreteness, because I've always been like, this is the deadline. You told me what it was. I will be done before then. And I always have been. And so then when I have clinicians that don't sign something or upload something with half the signatures to the document library, or, are not in time compliances with their BSPs, FBAs, or the quarterly reports, the 15th of the following month. Why? I always struggle with that myself, truthfully, because life does happen, and we can deal with that, right? But when it's a pattern, it's like, why?
A
I
pattern
know
or
it's
like
doable.
significantly egregious, right? Like a year where there's not a relevant BSP in the document library. Like
Or
That's
not a
bad.
quarterly update for a
For
year.
years.
Or
I've had
years,
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've
And
seen
that's
that.
like a real thing that happens. And agencies like our own, and probably all, if not most, you have practices in place, right? We do our own in-house auditing, right? We audit the document libraries, the portal, but like, I don't know, somebody come out and email me to come talk about this and correct me, but like, I can't catch it all. We audit periodically
Right.
on a unannounced schedule. So like the BCs don't know when we're going to do it on purpose, right? So hopefully they're more inclined to be, compliant, and I hate that word, but yeah. But nonetheless, no matter how much we do, we're still always finding a lot, and we're not special. It's got to be every
Oh yeah.
agency's
You're
got
not
to have
special.
it.
I'll tell you right there. You're not special.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Got to keep me down, and humble. Yeah. And so like, as much as we try, like we literally spend so much time in that kind of, risk mitigation of like self-auditing, internal audits, checking this, checking that. Jennifer is like the queen of forensic auditing. Like if I need to find something from like 16 years ago that was archived in the county clerk's office in 6 counties over, and somebody's uncle checked it out to do a land survey, like she'll find it. And
Yeah.
she'll find the first one before that and then the one after that. And so she does a lot of her forensic auditing, and it's, it's telling. And that's just in-house, And so that part worries me, because I come to it from a perspective of still practicing and always have been. And so like, I can get it done. Like what do we need to do as an industry to like help the behavior consultants or other disciplines do their stuff on time? There's a blanket question. Anybody got an idea? Sabrina, you're up.
I can tell you that when I have a case manager reach out to me and say, hey, do you have an updated BSP? And I'm like, I'm waiting on my HSPP to get it back to me. Like the stress that I feel when a case manager reaches out to me and says, I don't have this documentation, I'm like, let me get it for you. I can get you an unsigned copy until I get it back from the HSPP. I will email our HSPP, or I'll say, I missed it on my list of quarterly reports that needed to be done this month. I'll get that uploaded right away. The stress that I feel of like, I need to get that done is real. But I know that it's not across the board. I know that that is best practice, right? But that's not what's being seen across behavior consultants. And so I find it frustrating that not everyone is being held to the same standard.
Well, you brought something up that I didn't have a note on, and now you've got my thought sparked. HSPP timelines. I've learned varies wildly across the state. We shoot for a week or less. Like that's our goal, 7 days or less. And what I've learned, well, I didn't learn it. Like we knew in the old days, it used to take us a month. Like I would submit a BSP and I'd have to wait at least a month. Is that what you're experiencing? Like what kind of turnaround are you experiencing, Sabrina?
I have experienced longer wait times. I have experienced sending my HSPP documents and not hearing anything and basically having to reach out again and be like, I sent you some documents. I will say that as of lately, I've had 2 weeks probably before of turnaround before I get things back.
I hate to admit, but that actually sounds pretty decent.
It's
one
getting
thing-
better. I will say that my company does not require me to turn in my quarterly reports for an HSPP signature. I think that's something I believe that SBS is doing, correct?
That's a whole nother tangent. It's not, in my
Mhm.
opinion, it's not in my opinion and in my reading of my paper copy of the DDARS manual that I keep on my desk, it's not a requirement. But it doesn't mean you can't, right? But it's not a requirement. But for those who think that I pick every battle, I can assure you there's 2 battles I don't pick per battle I pick, and that was one I didn't pick. So we do have the HSPP review our quarterlies, and just because there was a battle I didn't pick. But jumping back to some of this turnaround, one thing that I've always wondered, and I've never gotten a concrete answer, right? Because like I said, I keep a DDARS manual on my desk. Compliance timelines, Nicole, right? So we all
Yeah.
know, right? What is it?
For FBAs and BSPs?
Yeah, what, 15 days or
Well, from initial, it's
45
45 days
days
and then 14
more.
Yes.
So, 59 days from starting, right? 59 days. But if we're saying the HSBP is taking a month, is that a month out of my days? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I don't expect you to have an answer because we don't have an answer. That is
Right,
something that
right.
is something I've discussed for a long time, and there's no, nothing in here. Same thing with the Human Rights Committee, right? Because after Sabrina brought up the HSPP, which I didn't have a note on that, I added the HRC note because then you have the HSPP turnaround, you have the HRC turnaround. Are those timelines? And I would love to get clarity, from whoever has it, the state or whomever, but like, if the HSPP is taking a month and the HRC is taking 2 weeks, it's a month and a half. Is that out of the timeline, or is it, 59 days till I wrote it, right? And then however long the HRC and the HSPP takes. So if it takes me 59 days, we'll just round it to 60. It took me 2
Yeah.
months. And let's just say the HSPP and the HRC take another month.
Mhm.
So it's 3 months within compliance. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Or is it whenever they decide it's in compliance, or when it's decided it's not in compliance, it's not. That's why I don't like ambiguity.
Right. Yes. No, exactly.
You know
And
what I mean?
I think some of this stuff is even, it goes along with ambiguity, but it's just each individual's interpretation, like the guide, the manual, the quality, all of those things can be a little bit up to interpretation.
In my
Um,
highlighting.
because I think I have an understanding, but truly, I don't know that it is. I have to reference. Listen, I'm not a walking, library anyway, so I read these documents on a daily basis because my brain just doesn't work that way. But I mean, I believe I have an understanding. But truthfully, this topic that is brought up, which is what everyone has touched on, is the understanding that from where case manager sits to where the provider, the BC sits, that understanding and flexibility at least needs to be there, some of it, because as a case manager, we're hyperventilating on our end as well, because we're saying there's a cap, we haven't done this, who's auditing this internally, externally, all of that. And at the end of the day, these are all admin things that, while they impact our individuals, aren't a direct impact to our individuals necessarily, but they're all compliance related admin tasks that we have to do.
And so for me, I feel like we're ambiguous and we're fluctuating on how we get this done. You have to, in some semblance, be at the mercy of us because you're waiting and you have to check this off. You have to close this out,
Yeah.
and you're reaching out to me, and it's taking me 3 days to call you back. An email's not getting replied to. I'm stressing because, like Sabrina said, I've sent this to the HSPP twice now, right? HRC still holding on to it. They kicked back 3 questions. I answered them, but that's going to take a whole nother week turnaround, right? Because it took a first week to get those questions in. Stuff like that always makes me wonder, because in the long run, like, if and when is it selected as it could be problematic?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
That's
sure.
what I don't like. That's what I
Anytime
struggle
there's not a
with.
streamline of understandings, direction, operations, if things aren't streamlined, you open the door for that problematic practices.
And that's what worries me. And I know there's going to be 1,000 people who watch this and argue that, like, Joaquin, you're way too concrete about some stuff. And I am, and I acknowledge that. But to me, some of this stuff I think needs to be more concrete, because then it's just, I know this is right or this is wrong. So like,
Right.
okay, Joaquin, you have 59 days to produce your work product, and you get another 30 days for the HRC and the HSPP. That lets us give real structured,
Right.
concrete parameters to Human Rights Committee and HSPP. Like, this is the threshold. If you can't meet this threshold, you can't do this. We need to
Right.
find
They
somebody
should
who
have a
will.
timeline as well, right?
Yeah. And I do give them a timeline, just
Mhm.
out of like choice, because I don't want to wait a month anymore. And now we have the ability not to, at least here. Right. But I
Mhm.
know historically it takes forever. Like, I remember writing plans, sending it in, and it was a month-ish before I got it back from the HRC. And then it was maybe a month when I got it from the HSPP, who then kicked back some stuff that needed changed. And then another month before I got it back. And then we're at 4
Right.
months before Nicole, you were getting that work product in the
Yeah.
document library and back in
Mhm.
Advocare. And everybody's yelling at me like I'm not doing my
Right.
work, but like I'm at the mercy of so many other factors.
And we don't know. We see both sides. Like, to me, anyways, I see some questionable BC practices on the BC.
Like what?
Well, like, well, at least I would say questionable in the fact that they're not saying we're waiting on HSPP. They're not saying we're waiting on HRC committee, HRC. They're not saying any of that. They're basically just
Communicate.
neglecting to upload
Oh, they're just not
anything and
doing
not
it.
communicating. Yeah. So
Right.
we have really this dual, like, is it this one or is it this one?
So when
So-
we have that flexibility in place, then we have people who are like, great, I can be flexible enough to do this the way that I feel is best for my individual, for my client, for what job that I'm doing. But you'll also have the people who are saying, I can get away with not doing.
So too much flexibility is not necessarily for the wrong type of person, right? Like, if you have an inch, are you taking that mile?
Right.
Mhm.
See, this is where I'm going to lose some people. So person-centered, completely agree with, right? Person-centered. So when I think of person-centered, and Sabrina, what you just said, when I think of like me doing things that are specific to my individual, and correct me if you see it differently, but I think about my clinicals. I think about my strategies, my interventions, the way I'm going to train these people. That is tailored to Johnny, Sally, Susie, whoever. But like the work product, the BSP, the customer is the state, the waiver. They're the ones paying for the work product. And whether it's Johnny's, Susie's, or Sally's, I can produce that work product in the same time frame across the board. Now, inside of that work product, it's very specific, right? Because I'm going to approach Johnny's target behaviors in his milieu and his, everything differently than I am Sally's. But I feel like I should be able to write it, have it HRC reviewed, HSPP reviewed, train staff, like concretely, all of them. I don't know.
You set the gold standard right there.
I feel like that, it should be one pathway, one process, one, expectation for the production of that work product. Now, the details of that work product is, 500,000 differences, because everybody's different,
Everyone's quarterly reports look different. The details everyone's putting in their quarterly reports are different. BSP is the same way. I mean, there's some structure there, but everyone's doing it their way and is doing it differently.
And you have all these different disciplines behind that, right? You've got special education, ABA, social work, all these different backgrounds approaching therapy from different perspectives. And so, yeah, it's going to be different.
That's information that I give out in my initial interview with clients. So I'll tell them here's what my background is, but I take a behaviorist approach while also taking a humanistic approach. So I will never put behavior over your humanness. And that's information that falls into, in my opinion, clients' rights to choose who their provider is.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't lose as many people as I thought I was going to with that.
I don't think you did.
Well, that's my concreteness. So like one of the things that we're going to dive into today is like what is reimbursable for, behavior management. And I sent out the 4 pages from the DDARS manual from, our handy dandy booklet, right? My little post-it tabs. And we're going to cover that in a second, but like one of the things that I struggle with is the ambiguity in the billing notes. Nicole, you ever take a look at billing notes? You ever ask for them?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on billing notes? What's just initial, like, what do you think about them?
I mean, it's one of those things. This is just a personal thing. I like to have my hand in just about everything, just to have an understanding. But I don't think I necessarily have an understanding or an opinion on the billable notes. I know what they're supposed to entail. I know what they're supposed to, cover the basis, again, like talking compliance, but they run the gamut. Like they are not uniform. They're very patchy in what they contain. Some of them are very robust and contain quite a bit of information, and some are just the bare bones. And some I think are questionable if they even contain the bare bones.
Hold on to that one. Sabrina, I'd like your initial thought to just billing notes, just general thought.
I remember when I first started as a behavior consultant, billing notes were something that stressed me out because I wanted to do them well. And nobody could give me like a concrete, here's how you do them and do them well. So
Hold on to that.
I'm a very robust person, and I'm going to describe everything that we did. For me, if it's not in the billing note, it didn't happen. So it's got to be in the billing note.
Yeah.
However,
documented or it didn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. However, I don't do a lot of Johnny displayed 3 instances of target
That's
behavior
ABA. Yeah.
and 2 instances of a replacement behavior with a verbal prompt. I don't do a lot of that.
In your billing note, that sounds like the quarterly report, more of an ABA kind of
Right.
documentation style. Jennifer, your turn. What are your initial thoughts on billing notes?
Pretty similar to Sabrina on the robustness of notes. Like I feel like it needs to detail what I'm doing and show that there is progress. Or even if it's a lack of progress, like, we're seeing Johnny every single week and if this is not working, we're going to do something different or whatever. Like, I feel like that you need to be able to look at that note and go, oh, okay, I see what's happening between the behavior consultant and the client or consumer. So yeah, for me, I think that they need to be more detailed and specific and show progress or lack of progress.
Jennifer, can I piggyback off of what you said? You talked about I can write in my note how this isn't working, so we're going to change kind of what we're doing. I really struggled with that with writing BSPs, because if I write something in my BSP and I say, okay, this for whatever reason is no longer serving us or working, I need to come up with a different procedure for this, that could change in another month. So do I have to keep updating my BSP every single time
Every
that I
month?
change?
I
Well,
wouldn't.
no, but every single time that we decide to try a new reinforcement schedule or whatever it could be.
What's best practice? I mean, this is the opportunity to discuss our opinions. What would be
I
the
think
best
it's
practice in
quarterly,
that?
right? Like maybe in the quarterly you can go, okay, because I feel like this kind of comes back to documenting what you've tried and attempted and didn't work, right? And so in your quarterly reports and stuff like that, and of course, like maybe updating your BSP quarterly to say, we did this, we did that, this worked, this did not, tweaked this, tweaked that kind of stuff. And then you're actually documenting those things that didn't work, so that, I don't know, next BC 5 years down the road comes in and goes, oh, you guys have already done this, it's already documented. So
I just have to say, I would not have access to any BC's notes from 5 years ago document. Like,
You should in the portal.
yeah,
that is not something that I feel like has been consistent enough.
yeah,
I can see
Um,
that. I mean,
Yeah.
But I
yeah,
wonder if
We don't, yeah.
that's
I
fair.
wonder if BSPs were more of like the live document, such as the PCISP is, that we could go in, make adjustments. I
Yes
know
and
that's
no.
not how it is,
Like
but
you submit a completed work product, but like,
right.
so this is where I disagree with Jennifer, right? So the verbiage in my interpretation is at least quarterly is when like we should be revising if needed. And so I think if a revision is necessary at month 1, month 2, and month 3, I do them. But at the quarterly, the meeting and on the quarterly report, I document these were all the amendments. These were all the revisions. This is what failed. This is what got me cussed out. This is why he threw this at me. And then now we're going to try these things. And that all gets documented. That's how I interpret that. But I also like, talking earlier, I think that's case by case, because there's a lot of individuals that are like, I don't amend the plan all year long.
Right.
Majority. But then there's plenty that like, we need to amend this several times. And that I know clinicians are going to watch this and go, but then I got to send it to the HRC again, the
Right.
HSBP. I got to go through the whole gamut.
It's so messy, right? I just did it this last year where I was changing 2 people's plans like every month because stuff was just going crazy. And then I'm getting lost in between like, well, I just did this updated copy. That one's with HRC. This other one's with HSPP. And just by the time you get it all back and signed, you are changing it again. And you're billing. Right? So
You're billing indirect,
yeah.
which I hate, by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry, BC's out there.
Right.
That's another thing we're going to talk about today. Remember, I don't remember which episode we alluded to indirect versus direct. But I'm gonna pull us into that rabbit hole today as well.
Standards.
I've decided what my new belief is, but we'll jump to that.
Oh, it's a new one.
Well, I've settled on one, I should say. But real quick, I'm going to share my screen real quick from the DDARS manual, just the behavioral support services, like 4 pages, right? I'm not going to stand it too long. I send it to the panel ahead of time. And then for those of you who watch, just pause your screen so you can read it and then, unpause and keep going. So. Okay. Let me know when you can all see this.
Yes.
Getting better about my sharing. So this is just pulled from the DDARS manual on behavior supports. So I'll read this real quick. Behavioral supports are an array of services designed to support individuals who are experiencing or are likely to experience challenges accessing and actively participating in the community as a result of behavioral, social, or emotional challenges. Behavior support services are intended to empower individuals and families by leveraging their strengths and unique abilities to achieve self-determination, interdependence, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all facets of community life across all environments, across the lifespan. So to me, why this is important is here is the list of reimbursable activities. So we're not going to, stay on this page for too long. So like I said, those of you who watch, pause this, read these bullet points. This is what the DDARS manual says behavior supports can get paid to do, right? FBA, BSP, working with the team, our strategy implementation, staff training, consulting with the team. And then this is about concurrent service deliveries for us seeing our individuals out, like a day program, right? So reimbursable activities. Now I sent that to the panel ahead of today's discussion. Did anything stand out? Any questions come from it? Nicole, you're not a BC. Was any of that anything come from that? Any thoughts?
No, I mean, I guess that because it's a hot topic right now is the concurrent services. That's really a hot topic in my realm, whether it's at day program, because I know there's another entity that's basically saying you should never be providing BC services when someone is in a day program.
Who's saying that?
We'll take that offline.
Okay, fair enough.
But you know her. But that and also the other hot topic thing that BC's I feel like was just a rude awakening, even though we had sort of an understanding, but that it wasn't really being implemented, which is those individuals that are in some sort of DCS or DOE funded facility. And so that's still a concurrent service concurrent services is the biggest thing that stood out to me.
Okay, fair enough. Sabrina, did anything in there stick out to you?
I think going along with the concurrent services, there's been a lot of question as of late of providing services in schools.
Mhm.
That's been a hot topic. I feel like in the BC world.
So
I've had
Allowable.
clients, parents in the past say like, I only want you to see him in school. Only want your support in school. And
Well, real quick before we get too far away from that one, I'm going to jump back. This is page 4 of those 4 pages. And activities not allowed, therapy services provided to an individual within the educational school setting or as a component of the individual school day. So to me, it's in here, right?
Yep.
So this is Department of Education funded, from my understanding. Somebody out there, correct me if I'm wrong, put it in the comments or tell me you want to come yell at me on cam. From my understanding, the Department of Education is responsible for behavior in school, right? We are home and community based, not educational based. And so I will and have definitely told BCs, if you're seeing cross environment things, right? Johnny has behaviors at, preschool, daycare, school, in the evening aftercare, at home, at the playground. I don't think it hurts to go observe occasionally, sparingly in the educational environment, to gather data and information from the teachers, staff, the aides, whomever, and observe. Cannot provide, a direct service there. And in my opinion, it needs to be sparingly.
So I did it yesterday. I did it.
We're
in
going to
the
cut
back
that
of
out of
class.
we're going to edit that out. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hid in the back of the room. There, I wasn't seen, right? And basically walked away from that with, I'm just collecting data that I think I can go home and help out with, like skill sets, right? So like I could see some things that were happening in class. And so I'm going to figure out where we can build skills and do that at home versus like, well, I'm going to try to sit down with so-and-so in the classroom and then have a meeting with the teacher and, do all of that. I mean, I really think that it's a beneficial thing to do, to go and observe, because you can see those peer interactions, which I don't ever get to see. And then use that to help them build those skills that might make them better in the school environment.
Yeah. And to that extent, I definitely agree. I think there is a useful component there, but like Sabrina, like you said, it's definitely a real thing. Families have been like, no, I don't want you to come over. I want you to just see Johnny at school. No, I'm sorry, I can't. The Department of Education funds that, and it's a different funding source. And I know there's bureaucracy and red tape, and it doesn't sound all cool because the family doesn't care, right?
Right.
And nor should they have to. Like, this is, our side of it problems. But like, at the end of the day, the truth is the truth. And
Or they don't like what the school is doing.
sure.
So they want me to try to get the school to do what they want the school to do.
And that's a battle because the school doesn't want us coming in and telling them they're wrong. Yeah, we saw that issue here in Lafayette. Glass got sued a long time ago for something or other. And ever since that, they won't let any outsider into their schools in the Lafayette area. They wouldn't let BCs in, nothing. You're not coming in. You're not observing what's going on in our classrooms.
Right.
And I don't even know why. Like, I don't know exactly what happened.
I've seen that a few times with schools as well. I just say no.
And if I'm being completely honest, I don't want to go to the school. If I'm being completely candid, like me personally, right? I'm not speaking for every BC in the state. Me personally, I don't want to go to the school, right? Home and community-based services. I want to work with this individual at home, out in the community. And I don't want to go to the school. There's like 30 of them in a small confined space. And that's how I get sick. Like, I'm never sick all year long until somebody sends me into an environment where there's like 30, like 7-year-olds running around. Like my niece, it's her birthday. It's her 7th birthday today. And I'm going to her dinner, but tomorrow her birthday party, I'm not going because no, there's going to be 30 of them little girls running around and I'm going to be sick. I'm not doing it. So that's just personal. I don't want to go to the school.
Going into the school, I remembered why I had such high anxiety in high school was because I don't know if you've been in a passing period trying to get to or from a client.
It's 1965. No.
And like 1800 high school teenagers are now surrounding you and you have no personal space, everyone's in the hallway. It's awful.
I'll start swinging and get beat up by a bunch of kids. No, I'm good. I don't like the schools, but in my opinion, I don't know that should be a hot topic in the BC world. And like I said, I might lose some people there. Whether the discussion isn't whether we want to or not, like we know I don't want to, but maybe there's a ton
Right.
of BCs out there that want to be in the schools. It's not that to me, that's not really the discussion piece. It's whether we can or not. And I don't feel like the verbiage says we can because, Department of Education's funding and responsibility and ours is over here. I think because of that division of labor, I don't know if that's the right way to phrase that. I don't think we can in my
How often
understanding.
some people do it is probably a bit too much. So I feel like it's kind of you go in, you kind of learn what you learn and you go back to the home. Like you don't go every week. You don't even go every month. Like what's going to change? So
yeah, to me, it should be just sparingly, few and far between. And I might get corrected. Somebody might view this and come in and be like, no more schools. Okay. I'm here to learn too.
Right.
But to me, it's like on an as needed basis, but no more than like rarely. I don't know. Real quick, jumping back to the reimbursable activities, right? Just going to bring it up one more time because I want to dive into something that is going to lose me a lot of fans. So we remember these, right? Reimbursable activities. This is what they are telling us. Basically, our what's the way I want to phrase this? Our funding source, right? Because that's who we, turn our work products into effectively. Obviously, we work with the individuals and they are the priority, but like at the end of the day, we turn in our work products to somebody who's going to pay us for that work. And so one thing that is going to lose me a lot of people, like I said, is the webinars, the CEUs, the conferences, the podcasts. I've started to kind of be outspoken about their ability to be billable, and I don't think they are.
I've never billed CEU. Like CEU is our requirement for training for us personally,
Retain,
professionally.
credentialing. Yeah. Yes. Does anybody want to touch on that? Their initial thoughts on that before I get to, soapbox it for a while? Nicole, what do you think?
This is
You're a case manager.
yeah.
You've got Johnny on your caseload,
Mhm.
and Johnny's BC builds webinars.
Had
and
it happen.
podcasts.
Have had it happen.
A
I've had
little, a
someone
lot.
bill for TBI research and the individual doesn't have a TBI diagnosis. So, this is where I say I have the saying where I say this is an eyebrow raised for me, like, because these are the things that are like questionable. Like, can BCs, sort of have some liberties that I think are questionable in the realm of practicing and being a best, even a compliance practices individual, but certainly an ethical one and a best practices. But I've seen this has made me really cynical, honestly, like these types of things. There are a few people that have just made me very critical and cynical of BCs as a whole. Unfortunately, I have a bit of a bias because it is not to a standard that I believe, even compliance wise, they should be practicing at. And those are things like billing for conferences, billing for things like that. That is a personal, I don't know. I mean, truthfully, I guess if that's still up to interpretation, but I don't know that that's allowable or not allowable based off of the 460 and guidance. So.
Okay. Fair enough. Appreciate that. Sabrina, what about you? What's an initial thought when you hear this?
My initial thought is that those are things that my past company has told me that I can do, and so I've done them. I've been told that's okay, and so I do it. I can tell you that there have been times where I had a client come to me and say, I'm struggling with my sexuality and my religion, and I don't know how to get those two things, on the same page. And I was like, I don't have enough education on that topic to answer that question for you. I need to do some research. And I did watch webinar, and I did watch some TED Talks, and I watched things that or looked up some things that I could send to him and say,
Yep.
is this what you're looking for? I don't know if I answered your question as
Yeah.
far as like I think there can be some benefit to it. I don't know that I want a client's budget to be fully occupied with, I watched all these webinars.
And those are some of the things that I've seen. I've seen people that have six hours of B-Man, and 6 hours of B-Man is being spent on indirect. So those webinars, those things like that.
I've
So
got
that's the eyebrow
several
where
thoughts
I'm
on
like,
that.
That's not good.
Yeah. So before I get my spiel, Jennifer, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty close in the belief that you should be spending more of the budget in face-to-face meetings than with the indirect stuff. And Joaquin and I have talked about this before, because like, you know, in those first couple months of an initial, you're writing a behavior plan and you've got all this crazy stuff going on. And so that indirect gets a little high. But like, once you kind of get through that initial phase and you plans in place and you're meeting with the person every week, that should be the bulk of your billing, not one meeting a month and then all the rest of it is like research, like
Webinar after webinar after webinar.
right.
Okay. Soapbox time. So I'm gonna share the page again. Hopefully it's the last time, it's the same page real quick, so I can, explain my thoughts here. So this line right here under reimbursable activities, developing a comprehensive behavior support plan and subsequent revisions, right? We're going to highlight that. Hold on to that line, right? Because this is where the concrete side of me comes in and says, I hate ambiguity when it comes to this kind of stuff, because that line to me opens up things for ambiguity, because it says development of a behavior support plan. So then people can articulate, right? And the title of this episode is Articulation, right? People can articulate the webinar, the podcast, the CEU, the conference, as well. This was in pursuit of developing that behavior support plan. In my opinion, my singular opinion. Now, when we started this, we had 17 subscribers. And after I say this spiel, I'm going to have like 6. I don't think any of that's billable. I don't think podcasts are billable. I don't think listening to this is billable. I don't think watching webinars is billable. I don't think CEUs are billable. I don't think conferences are billable. I don't think that they should be billable. In my opinion, and at SBS, I sent out this whole communication to the entire statewide team, all 80 plus behavior consultants. And it was Jennifer, you'll remember, it was the plumber analogy. So when I was explaining this to the SBS BCs, I said, if you had a water line break or your water heater broke and you're paying a plumber, you call a plumbing service, say, hey, my water heater's, spilling out water, it's broken. Can you come service it? And he came over and he said, okay, so I sat at the office, I watched a 3-hour webinar on how to fix this water heater at, $70 an hour. And now I'm here and I'm gonna spend 3 hours to fix it at $70 an hour. And then he fixes it. And then now your water heater's fixed. Do you want to pay that person for 6 hours? If that person charged you, Nicole, at your house for 3 hours to sit at the plumber's office, I don't know what they call it, the shop. This individual sat at the shop and researched the work that you called for them to do, and they billed you for it and then came and did the work, and the work was fine, right? They were able to complete it, everything's fixed, and now you have a 6-hour bill. When I put it into that lens, I start to get a lot more people who kind of understand my perspective of it. Where like, in my opinion, I don't know every behavior, every diagnosis, every symptom, every range of behaviors for even one diagnosis, right? You line up 20 kids with, Wheeler-Paredes, it's going to look completely different across all of them. You lined up 20 individuals with Down syndrome. It doesn't matter. But it's my job to sharpen my tools on my time.
Mhm.
It's how I feel if I'm going to serve that person. So if I get somebody on my caseload, brand new to me, with a diagnosis that I've never encountered, and I agree to take that person. This also delves back into the spiel about contractor versus employee, because contractors have choice, employees get assigned. But like, as a contractor, I get the conscious decision to say, yeah, I will interview for this person. I'd love to take them on if they pick me. To me, then it becomes my imperative to sharpen my tools, sharpen my skill set to work with them, or to say, it's outside of the scope of my abilities. I think Jennifer's better suited. She's had more experience with A, B, and C. Would you like to interview her and see if you'd like to work with her? And people are going to get mad about that whole spiel.
Well,
I
and you
mean,
got
I
hired.
100, oh, sorry, Jennifer.
Sorry, I was making a comment that you get hired for your knowledge and behavior. You've got a degree, you've been studying it. And obviously we all know that sometimes you run into things that you're like, wow, I've never heard of that before. But
Things, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I could get on a soapbox about that, how my entire master's education did not educate me on
Agreed. I'm not going to argue
disability.
that one.
there's
Yeah, I
that
won't.
too, yeah.
I won't argue that one. I learned more in the first year of practice than I did in, undergrad and graduate school. I will any social worker through and through will agree to that, because it's what you read and what you learn in school is good and helpful, but it's not out there. It's not out in the trenches. But I don't know. I mean, okay, Sabrina, and this is, don't take this any kind of way, right? You walked into behavior management. This is what you were taught. Now, hearing a different perspective, what kind of thoughts does that invoke? Any kind of thinking about it? Like, what are you thinking now?
My thoughts turn to, what other indirect work am I doing that isn't best practice?
There,
I don't do
okay.
a lot of indirect work. I just am not a big indirect work person. But I know plenty of people develop a lot of visual aids or social games, things like that. And so then they're billing for cutting and laminating and printing and creating, which is not my strong suit. But it also feels like how teachers don't get paid to do all of the things that they do at home to create those materials for their students, which I believe teachers should absolutely get paid for.
That one's tough. I think that's going to be like an orange and a mandarin. Like, we're close, but we're not. Yeah, teachers is a whole nother, they need quadrupled salaries, and that's a whole nother thing.
Another podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show, because I'm sure there's a lot there that I don't have the iron in that fire. But on the topic of indirect and direct, Nicole, what do you feel? What are your thoughts? Right, you've already brought up, like, I've seen a lot of it. Like, if you just had a general opinion on BCs of direct and indirect, what would that be?
So I have like a hat to wear for this as a case manager, a hat to wear for this as a scholarly practitioner, welcoming in or walking into the BC world. My opinion aligns with yours. I don't believe in indirect. And a part of that is it's a constant conflict for me, because while one BC might use it in a very appropriate therapeutic way, another one isn't. So, and I think while I think there needs to be flexibility with everything, I also think things need to be concrete as well. So if you are in fact walking into this world, if you are in fact supporting your individuals, you're never going to know everything, just like you're saying. And even if you did know everything under the sun about Down syndrome or whatever diagnosis, you don't know that person. So you're going to have to investigate. You're going to have to sharpen those tools, because on the case manager end of things, we sit in quarterly meetings, a lot of times very discouraged by saying, what was your utilization, right? Like, what was your BC utilization for the quarter? And we find out you've exhausted, not you, collective, you've exhausted the BC budget for indirect services. My personal preference to allow for flexibility is the same model that's adhered to with rec and music therapy. And that is, for every hour of direct service, 45 is direct and 15 minutes is indirect.
75-25.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
That gives me a guide that allows for some flexibility while having a guide to go off of to keep best practices in mind. But truthfully, as a practitioner that will one day be in the BC world, I agree. I don't feel like our individuals with their limited budgets are being benefited or or appropriately advocated for with indirect billing.
Mhm.
Can I throw a question out to you then? I have a client who likes to call me every single day.
Don't answer
Mhm.
it.
I had a BC bill for a year for text messaging.
Oh,
Because that's what the individual preferred. I think personally, I think as a clinician, meeting those person-centered approaches, but driving them in a way that is appropriate. And I'm not saying it's not, Sarah, please don't let that be the takeaway, because I'm not trying to say you're doing anything wrong, but I just think as a clinician, it is the goal of the clinician to meet that person where they're at and drive appropriate billable, reimbursable, ethical practices for that person.
Here you go, Nicole. So look at this one little bullet point on our reimbursable activities. Now, I'm sure it's not written this way, but this looks like a little bullet point to me. So I think somebody could finagle the text messaging in there, but like, this should not be a year's worth. This shouldn't be 10% of a budget. This should be like 0.5%, in my opinion, Just,
Yeah,
you know.
I agree. I completely agree.
So on the indirect and indirect, I spoke on it a little bit in prior episodes, and Jennifer has somewhat of a different opinion, and I've come to compromise. I think my opinion is, because we don't have a concrete rule, right, Nicole? But in my opinion, it is an industry accepted standard of the 75-25, 75% direct, 25% indirect. In my opinion, and this is where I'll lose a lot of BCs, is I think 25 is just too much. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it's overused and abused. Yes, I have a laminator right here because when I was at full practice, I was one of those people that laminated a bunch of cool stuff. Let's have some fun. It still didn't amount to 25% of billing. Like, and especially if I made a token economy or a chart or this for Johnny, I now had that rubric. And so when I made it for Sam, it took 10 minutes, because I already did it the first time for 45 minutes. Like, I don't, so in my opinion, 85-15, and I would love for that to be concrete, not like a guide. Like, you cannot exceed 15% of your billing in indirect. If I were a policymaker in that regard, as far as like, DDARs and all that kind of stuff, I think 85-15. And I honestly, I think it's 90-10, but Jennifer's right. There is room for latitude. So that's why I'm going to compromise and say 85-15.
that's better.
Because I think the majority of the time I can hit 90-10, and occasionally I'm going to need that extra 5% space for that specific individual who needs a little bit more indirect. And when I say indirect, it's not just this webinar stuff that we're trying to get rid of. I don't think any of that billing should be happening. The visuals, that's great, but like, that's your documentation. That's your BSP, your quarterlies, your FBAs. I can get all of that done in the 85-15. And I don't think I'll have trouble. You know what I mean? Like, I think I can comfortably, reasonably get that done in the 85-15, no problem with leftover indirect space, if that makes sense.
I mean, I certainly agree that the goal should be to see people in person as much as possible.
Mhm.
But I want to take it further than a goal and make it more required because of the ones that take the latitude. Oh, well, it's 75-25, so maybe I'll do 70-30 because it's like around that threshold. And then, all of a sudden Nicole's, asking for billing notes and pulling utilization, and it's 3-hour webinars. It's a podcast on, I don't know. I don't think we should be billing for those things. I think if I get an individual referred to me with some behavior, some diagnosis, anything that I am less familiar with, and I interview with them and they want to go with me, and I am making the conscious choice to work with them, I'm going to come home, I'm going to sit at this desk, and I'm going to do my due diligence. Or I'm going to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not available to take that individual onto my caseload. I'll refer you to a few other clinicians that I think have a better skill set in that specific area. But to me, it's just like the plumber. It's just like the lawn care, the whatever, whatever service, right? We're all service providers. If you want to provide heating and cooling, and then you want to branch out into plumbing, you have to go know how to do plumbing before you come and plumb. You don't come, I hire you, you learn how to plumb, and then you plumb all while I'm paying you. You know what I mean? That's how I always look at it. Like, I'm hiring you to just come do the service.
Can I
And
open a can of worms?
Can you?
One that you kind of opened up before anyway, but I guess I was just gonna kind of go down this road
I'm
of,
scared.
yeah, you should be. So,
Uh-oh.
yeah, so.
Who
in
knew
terms-
Jennifer was so fierce?
I did. I could have told you that.
There are some practices out there where a behavior consultant may not want to bill all the indirect, but they might be getting requests as to why they haven't billed everything down.
Yeah, you're talking about billing down the budget.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, like, the BC may not be using it. The BC may not want to. I mean, the family may be canceling all the appointments, and then the BC's going, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna meet the agency requirement for all of the units I'm supposed to bill, and I'm gonna have to figure something out.
Nicole, have you heard about this billing down the budget?
Yeah, I've also heard of the opposite of that. So,
What's the opposite of that?
well, the opposite to me is a sort of thought or practice that you have X number of units or hours, but you're only supposed to bill 80% of those. You're not supposed to bill 100% of those. Never. Like, you're never supposed to bill 100% of those. So it's always interesting hearing
Never heard that
industry
before.
differences. I'll talk more about
That's
that
a
with you
new one.
offline.
Yeah, that's a new one. I've not heard that.
I think the first time I've heard about the one that you guys are talking about is actually from you, from previous situations. So yes, but I'm familiar with it, just not super familiar as you guys would be.
So, yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So what Jennifer is bringing up is billing down the budget. So this is a can of worms because it is historically a practice in the B-man industry. Anybody can come argue with me about that. You're wrong. This happens all the time. Companies want a BC to bill the budget down. And so then let's say you're not, right? Let's say I'm pacing at 60% of the budget, which to me, if I'm pacing at 60% of the budget, that's all I ended up needing. So maybe you, the case manager, Nicole, can take some for something else. Or from my understanding in the waiver, there's no requirement per the waiver that I have to bill the whole waiver. If those dollars don't get spent, they just go back into the big pool.
That is the purpose for quarterly reviews, so we can take unused hours and refunnel them as the individual needs.
And if we don't end up spending it, they start over the next year with a new budget and we move on. Like, from that perspective, I don't feel like I have to spend it, right? But an agency, many agencies will come to BCs and say, hey, I see you're only billing at a 60-70% pace. Let's get creative on helping you build down that budget, because they want you to build it down to 90-100% because maximizing, the amount
Profit.
you get. Correct, Sabrina. And so that is, to me, like the gateway to like webinars, podcasts, CEUs, conferences, research.
Yeah, your creativity is the indirect methods.
Sure. And I think one way to reduce some of that is to take away the volume of indirect that you're allowed to do. And this is where I'm going to lose more of those 17 BC subscribers. Okay. I keep saying I'm not going to keep sharing the screen, but I'm wrong because I keep forgetting, right? So reimbursable activities, right? This is what the state is telling us we are allowed to do and we'll get paid for, right? So tell me if you think I'm crazy. Give us the notes. Instead of wildly different notes across the state from every provider, all 400 B-man providers, give me your template. So whenever I write a BSP, tell me how to document it. Whenever I do a FBA, tell me how to document it. And you should only be seeing these like 8 notes, because these are the 8 reimbursable things or the 12 reimbursable, or you know what I mean? Whatever it is, So that way it takes away the room for articulation, because if I can write this in a way that is wordy enough and sophisticated enough, I can bill for this conference to 5 consumers that like, that I don't know, to me, that shouldn't be allowed, but it
Can
has to
I
happen.
ask you a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
You said, billing this conference to 5 people.
Yeah.
Are people, like,
Yes.
I attended a conference between 10 and 11, and I've billed 5 people between 10 and 11.
So what I've seen in the industry over the years is maybe less of that, more like I attended a conference from 8 to 1, 5 hours. And I
Mm.
billed Johnny for hour 1, Sam for hour 2, Susie for hour 3. To me, none of that is billable, but
Well, for me, that's a second layer here of like, if I provide a service to, 2 consumers at the same time, is that billable to both people?
not concurrently.
Right. That's why I was worried that's what you were saying.
I mean, that's probably happened. I'm sure that's happened, but I'm more alluding to like the 5 hours, 1 hour a piece.
Okay.
That is something that I know happens commonly. Or like when I say a 3-hour webinar, in my experience of what I've observed over the years as an agency director for a couple agencies and whatnot, isn't that they're necessarily watching 1 3-hour webinar for Johnny. They'll watch the 3-hour webinar, and I'm not honestly convinced. And this is where I really lose BCs. I'm not honestly convinced you're watching all these webinars. I'm not, because I'm not. I have to drudge through my 10 CEUs every year, let alone 16 hours of webinars in a month for my caseload. Like, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to lose people for that. But like, I don't believe it. I'm not doing it. And so, but they'll take that 3-hour webinar and bill Sam for an hour, Johnny for an hour, Susie for an hour, and document it very well articulated. I've read billing notes. I've read thousands upon thousands of billing notes, and they'll articulate it in a fashion. So like, it sounds cool, but like, I'm not buying it anymore. And I'm not letting this happen here anymore. And I'm hoping, as we do this cycle of best practices, we can start pushing the industry to like, let's stop billing this. This isn't real. It's just, I don't know. That's my opinion. Goodbye webinars. I'm not saying that they're not a valuable learning tool. Watch all of them, but like,
Sure.
I don't think I should be billing Johnny $72.80 an hour times however many hours to watch a webinar.
There's my applause for you on that.
Mhm.
Did this pop up around COVID when we
No.
all had to work from home?
This has been going on for the better part of a decade.
Long time.
I think it exacerbated in COVID.
Mhm.
Sure. Yes. No argument there. When COVID came around and Appendix K and all of us working virtually compared to the old ways. Yes. I think things probably got worse, but no, this was going on long before COVID was ever even conceived. Yeah, it's been a long time. And I feel like a lot of BCs that I encounter, I made a note here on my notes for today's episode. And I wrote that like many BCs will arrive at SBS and have to unlearn a lot of billing practices and then learn what I consider to be the way it should be done based off of like my experiences and what I read from the regs. Because like I said, those 4 pages from the DDARS manual, unless you manipulate the verbiage, and forgive me for using that word, but unless you manipulate the verbiage, I don't see anything that says I can bill for CEUs and conferences and webinars and podcasts and videos and whatever. And then somebody will tell me, well, because of the ambiguity in some of this language. And so then my counter to that is, if I'm at a point where I have to manipulate verbiage so it'll work, that doesn't work. Whatever that thing is, if I have to find a way to like round about it to make it work, it doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Joaquin, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I just did. Oh, that's what I thought you were going to say.
No.
You keep saying I'm going to lose. I checked and we're up to 32 subscribers, by the way.
I'm always going to say 17.
You keep saying I'm going to lose people on this point. I don't think we should be doing this. What are things that we do that you feel like we should be able to bill for? Are there things that we do that we don't bill for that you feel like we should be able to?
That's a great question. You were asking Jennifer, right? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was asking Jennifer.
Oh,
The only thing that, and I do that laminating and cutting and worksheets. I'm a worksheet person. I've always been about like, oh, I'm gonna go see Johnny. I need 7 worksheets because
it's true.
I just have a ton of worksheets. And so it doesn't take a ton of time to do that. I have, teachers pay teachers and these websites that I go to, and I know how to look them up and print them and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's important to me. And I feel like that is how I make a difference with my clients. And so like, I feel like that's important. It's not always, sometimes the worksheets are not laminating, with the younger people I work with, then I am doing like colorful, I do like the bingo and, those different kinds of games and flashcards and that kind of stuff. And so then that starts taking a little more time. So I would stand for that. Like, I feel like we can really educate and teach, kids, especially who they're not going to sit down and just do your black and white worksheet. They want to play bingo. So, yeah, I feel like that one is a good one.
I deflected to Jennifer because I wanted to take a moment to really think about your question.
You hit that really well. I had no idea that that was what you had done.
Oh, good. Thank you. So my answer to that is I don't know. I don't know. Right now in this moment, I can't think of anything that I feel like isn't billable that like I really think should be. Because like to me, it's the home and community-based services. So to me, I should be with my person in the home, in the community. And to me, home and community is a lot. Like, sure, your house is whatever, but like when you think about community, like we can go anywhere all over Lafayette and do servicing anywhere. And so to me, there's a lot of latitude in that, right? Identify with this individual what they want to work on, put that into my behavior plan, and then go out there and do it. And I feel like I have plenty to work with there. Yeah. I don't currently, I'm gonna think about that some more. I wrote that down. I'm gonna think about it some more. Nothing comes to mind that I'm like, man, I really wish this was billable. You guys already heard I don't want to go into the schools anymore. So like I'm okay with that not being billable because I don't want to go there. Yeah. It's a great question though. I think we come across a lot of these problems. And again, this is going to be my opinion. And it's one of the many reasons why we went with the contractor model here at SBS versus the employee model is the billing quotas. Because the billing quotas to me potentially lead to the manipulative and even tantamount to fraudulent billing practices that we see in our industry because of that pressure, right? You have a salaried position, you need to bill 120, 130, 140 billable hours a month. And if you're not hitting that, or you're not getting the referral base to hit that, get creative. Getting creative to me is exploitative, however you say that word.
Mhm.
And then eventually
Exploitive.
Thank you. English was my second language, by the way. And so then, like I said earlier, tantamount to like fraud, right? Like if you're having to, like I said earlier, go around to like make it work, it just doesn't work. It's the fruit of the poisonous tree, in my opinion. And that's a big reason why we are contractors, because there's no billing quota. If you bill 20 hours, 150 a month, so you get paid, there's no expectation, there's no consequence. If you build 120 hours this month and the next month you build 70, unless we get a complaint from families or a case manager, I'm not going to come ask you questions. If you get a complaint, then, we have to address all complaints, right? But like, I'm not simply going to go check in on you on your billing. That's not how it works here. It's not how it's going to work. And I think that takes away the pressure and the creativity, in my opinion. What do you think about billing quotas? Nicole, you first.
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I think if you, again, like if you crack the door open for the potential for interpretation, creativity, because of trying to meet some type of quota versus that person's needs and that person's wants and needs, desires. If you're meeting those, that should be your quota. It shouldn't be the billing number.
Sabrina, what do you think?
I think I've definitely been told by supervisors, this person has a really big budget. Is there anything more that you could be doing for that person? I think I have felt a lot of pressure to like, I have an hour of my time available. I have to get creative of how I'm going to fill that hour. Right. And so I have to basically make up work for myself to do.
I will give you I don't know if it'll provide you with any comfort or solace, but I will tell you, we are aware of dozens of agencies that instruct their BCs to get creative, which is why like these topics are coming up, because it's not one agency, it's not five, it's rampant. Right. And so that's why this stuff's coming up. Jennifer, how much do you love billing quotas?
They're her favorite.
Yeah. I mean, it's, besides all the points that have come up here today about why they're not a good idea, it also kind of takes away from your own therapeutic, like decision-making skills, right? Like, so if, I'm meeting with Johnny and he's met a whole bunch of goals and now he's got a job and he's like, can we just meet every other week because I'm really busy and I'm doing well? Shouldn't I be able to say, of course, well, that's your choice anyway. If you just want to meet every other week, I'll just see you every other week. And then you just call me if you need me, right? Like that's my ability and my client's ability to make those decisions. Whereas if I feel like I've got a quota on me, I'm like, no, can I come see you at work? Can I, how about the weekend? Can we go out to McDonald's? Like you were going to have this, I have to bill for you kind of feeling. It's not ethical. Like that.
It's like a billing bias, right? Like a billing bias.
Yeah. So there's just so many reasons why
it's treating people like cash cows.
Exactly.
Was that a really harsh way to say that?
I mean, yeah, it's I would have said commodities, but that works too. I'm not here to censor anybody. Jennifer, you brought up a point that I didn't occur to me in my days of prep in my 4 pages of notes. But that does happen where.
Can I tell my research story? Can I tell that from like
send
6 or 7 years ago?
Oh yeah, I know it. Go
you
ahead.
Remember? Okay, so 6 or 7 years ago, long ago when I worked for another company, I had quotas I had to meet and I wouldn't do it. So I had someone who was just doing well and I just wasn't hearing from this person very much and I really couldn't get an appointment. They just weren't really interested. So there was really a lot of units left in the budget. And so my team lead, supervisor, whatever you want to call them, called me and said, hey, you've got quite a few units left here. And I'm like, they don't want to meet. Like I've called, and I've called.
Nicole, you're going to love this.
Did you document those calls?
Yes and no. I definitely had to show that I was trying. So that was something that like, it was more cumulative notes of like, on Friday, you're like called Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but this was just somebody who didn't want to have service. They're just not interested. Right. So I'm bugging the heck out of them because I have to. And then like, so I get this phone call that is like, hey, you're not using these units. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. And they're not meeting with me and I'm not billing them. And she's like, well, do you mind if I go ahead and bill them for you? Under research, like I'll
just
go
wait.
ahead and research, some stuff regarding your client and I'll send it to you. And I'm like, yeah, you're the boss, right? You do what you want to do. And so they build like 20, I'm guessing because I can't remember, 20 to 30 units worth of research and emailed me 2 articles. My story.
What do you think? What do you think, Nicole?
That's why I'm cynical.
Right?
I mean,
It's like,
truly, it's appalling. It is appalling, but it is echoed time and time again. But that experience, and knowing you, Jennifer, I know it has shaped you to be the stellar BC that you are today. Not that you would have done that, but this is what industry-wide, in my opinion, tarnishes the good work that BCs could be doing, because people, families, individuals, I just met with someone the other day who had a preconceived notion about BC services because of someone else's experience. And you know what? It was based off of a BC who was unethical, didn't practice appropriately, but now they're just like, nope, not doing it. So it really,
Yeah.
it's a much more global issue, but that is truthfully why I'm a cynic. Situations like this.
right.
I wish the situation Jennifer was describing was like a one-off rarity. That's like that's an old story that like we talk about all the time. Because that one story kind of it turned into a whole snowball effect of situations, because that was like what opened a Pandora's box. And if you know me, you know I go digging, right? I carry a shovel with me everywhere I go. Now I started digging, and then we found more and we found more, and years later, right? Industry-wide, in my opinion, that kind of thing is rampant, where the NOA isn't for Sabrina or Jennifer or Joaquin, it's for the company. Technically speaking, the company has the authority over it. Technically, I don't agree with that. So technically, like at SBS, I can go into Jennifer's individual and bill X hours. Technically, that happens in the industry a lot. In my opinion, that shouldn't, and it's wrong, and we definitely don't do it. I have no idea how many hours anybody has in our company, because we don't look at those. The BC gets their service authorizations, and we don't look at them unless there's a billing issue. But like, I have no idea if you're pacing at 60%, 100%, 2%. We don't know. But that's an industry. I wish I could tell you that wasn't uncommon. It's not. It's common, where a company will come in and bill 4, 5, 6 B-man hours as the level 1, as a psychologist. And then you'll call the psychologist and be like, hey, I saw you had 6 hours of billing of level 2 billing, not the level 1 billing. I saw you had 6 hours of my level 2 budget billing on my person. Can we sit down and go over them? And then the HSBP will be like, who's that? I didn't do 6 hours, but somebody from the agency plugged that into the billing system. Like, that's a normal thing that happens. That needs
And
to
these
stop.
are dollars that are coming out of the supports for our individuals. And that is what's heartbreaking.
If you don't need it for that 80, in my opinion, 85% direct, 15% indirect. If you don't need it, don't spend it. They can either spend it on other services, or it just goes right back into the pool, from my understanding, which then continues to fund the waiver, for the future. Like, there's no requirement to spend it, in my opinion.
I had a client that I felt no longer needed my services. I had supported her through school. She graduated from high school. She was doing really well. And I think she really needed instead recreational therapy. And so I talked to the team. I talked to the case manager. I talked to parents. Parents agreed, and I terminated services. And the case manager told me repeatedly how proud she was of me, because once a client has behavior management on their NOA, it never goes away, because BCs have to bill. And I said, this client doesn't need me.
Shouldn't have to. We're not going to have to anymore. One thing that is also very prevalent in the industry, and I know of many agencies that have this, and they're all going to hate me for it, but Nicole, they have special billing note templates that are designed of that, like the way they articulate those gray things, right? but they find a way to articulate it so it passes, right? Maybe it passed whatever, review. And so then, okay, it worked. We keep it. And they build these sheets of note templates that have passed. That basically, like, I can get away with.
So they've already gotten the green light. So this might be something you want to get creative with.
Well, and I don't even want to call it the green light. They just didn't get the red light.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay, fair.
Like,
Yeah.
like billing, let's just use a simple example of like billing for a webinar. They found a way to articulate it and it ended up passing. Not in the sense that like, yes, this is good, more like it
Yeah, right.
wasn't caught or wasn't flagged, didn't raise suspicion.
Sure.
And once it passes, keep that one, right? It passed. And then as time goes on and years go on, they have a list of special note templates that pass. And
So you could
go over.
copy and paste all these allowable.
Yes, specialized articulated notes that will allow you to bill for those creative whatevers that
I'd like to say I'm shocked, but
there's a lot out there. And we've gotten our hands on many of them.
Mhm.
BCs have sent in many of those, and I'll sit and read them, and a lot of it is kind of like laughable because it just feels so articulated that like, unless you have a minimum of a master's or PhD, first of all, I don't know half these words. Like, it's so like overly whatever that like, honestly, I could see a reviewer like, yeah, that looks
right,
fine.
that's good.
Like, it's
Someone breaking out the dictionary and thesaurus on trying to.
like, it's too much. And like I've been preaching earlier, like if you're at the point where you have to find a way to articulate it, it's
Mhm.
you're clearly not doing whatever you're supposed to be doing, because it's not hard for me to articulate. I met with Johnny. We worked on target behavior A and B. This is how we worked on it. This is the report I got from mom. These are the, strategies that I, continue to reinforce. This is the data I collected from the data tracking sheet on the fridge. Like, I can articulate that easily every
Yeah.
week. And so if I have to try, then I think it's problematic. I got one more question that I want to get or one more thought. I have an opinion and I want to get all of your reactions to it and see what you think. And this is where I'm definitely going to lose more BCs. And Nicole, we're going to start with you, but it is 99% my stance, my opinion, that behavior management should be like case management, that we should be the only service you can provide, because B-Man to me is so specialized, so problematic. There's so much complexity to it that I think it should be the only service allowed at that agency. Like, if you provide B-Man, that's all you can provide. That's my
Well, I think to sort of align with that is, and maybe deviating from that, is to say we had case management innovations, right? Case management went through a major change. I believe behavioral should have an innovations. And I believe that part of that is what you're talking about, but part of it is a major overhaul with some more guidance or concrete information, more with, I'm not trying to open up a can of worms here, but number of individuals, perhaps number of hours spent with a particular individual in a given period of time. So I believe in a behavioral innovations of sorts. So probably a polarizing opinion, but it is mine.
I could see that, but I appreciate that. Sabrina, what do you think about that? What do you think about my stance or opinion that if you're a B-Man provider, that's the only service you should be allowed to provide?
I think it's a really interesting question because I am transitioning between jobs right now. So I have the viewpoint of my past employer as well as the viewpoint of my new employer. And I'm seeing those differences and I'm seeing those changes in how companies are run. I think, especially at my last company, I also provided counseling services, which allowed me to serve individuals who were not on the waiver. And it is really hard to find counseling services for individuals with disabilities. Very few places have that training, have that background.
Fair.
But I will say that the more services that you dip into, the bigger admin team you have to pay for, the bigger buildings you have to pay for. I mean, the cost of keeping that company up increases, right? And then the behavior consultants or the therapists who are doing the work aren't getting paid for the value that they're bringing into the company because there are so many other expenses that have to be covered.
And then to that, I would respond with, is it B-Man's responsibility to cover everybody else's expenses?
I don't want it to be.
Just a global thought, not necessarily anybody needs to answer, but just to spin the wheels. Cause I think historically my experience has been B-Man is what agencies want for the reimbursement rate to cover either costs or just to increase the sheer profit margin. Anywho, Jennifer, what is your thought on my gonna lose me a lot of friends thought?
I don't know if I've thought about that one so much. But I'm trying to dig back in my memory to working at companies that had multiple things, and it's a lot of like a pot of money moving, right? Like that, those little budgets are kind of moved this way and that way, if I remember correctly. And then I don't know, maybe conflict of interest sometimes, right? Like if you've got waiver homes, and then you're just using that company's therapists and you can't.
Now you're dipping into another can of worms.
I know there's another one, right? I didn't even mean to open that one, but it's true, right? Like, I mean, I hear these stories about, well, you know, we're already with the residential waiver home, so we're just going to stick with this company's providers, good or not, right? So, I mean,
It's always cringy when I see 7 providers and 7 services rather, and all 7 of them are the same agency.
Same agency.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
and one thing that will come about in a future episode, what I've also experienced is some agencies will tell families, which is a bad no-no, is, hey, if you want service B and C, we have that, but only if you take behavior management with us as well, which that is clear, you know, coercion.
Mhm.
And that's a can of worms I will be opening in a couple of episodes from now. But I think what led me to that philosophy, that mindset, and Nicole, I don't disagree with you. I think an overhaul of behavior management would be prudent just because I think the efficacy of the service, the efficacy of like the dollars spent has gone out the window. I think there's just a lot of wasted money. I think there's too much ambiguity. I think there's too many, and I'm going to lose people here too. There's too many practitioners that, like, simple example. I don't know if I talked about this before. So we provide level 1 services for other agencies, right? Not everybody has an in-house HSPP. We do that. Not the one you're thinking of, Nicole. Not the one you're thinking of. There's another one. I know exactly what example you're thinking of. Whole nother one. In this example, 2 individuals out in Muncie reached out and said, hey, you know, we're opening up behavior management. We need level 1. Would you be willing to? And I said, yeah, probably. Let's set up a Zoom. We'll meet, make sure, you know, we can set it all up. And more often than not, it's really not a big deal, right? It's a real simple thing to set up. You can do your level 1 through our HSBP, through SBS, no big deal. I set up a Zoom and I meet with them, and we start to get to talking on how, like, we process level 1. And they started to ask questions that immediately red flagged, because I was like, that's, anybody who's been practicing wouldn't have that question, right? So then I asked them, how long have you guys been behavior consultants? Neither one of them had ever done this, ever. But they both were qualified, right? They had master's degrees in the respected field. They were preparing their waiver packet. They were going to apply. And as long as, you know, everything's filled out, they'll get approved. And that, like, took me back, and I had to think about that. I had to, like, really digest that. Like, you've never even done it, you know? And so, minor example, but just, yes, I think an overhaul of the service might be prudent to refine our reimbursable activities and get more concrete on several things. And I, you know, I don't think it'll happen, but I truly think
And it's not
that,
meant to be restrictive. No one's saying an overhaul needs to be restrictive, just streamlined.
yeah.
Streamlined.
And I also
Can I just say that
still,
any system needs to be reviewed and streamlined. Any system.
Mhm.
I don't know of any system that doesn't need that kind of maintenance. That just doesn't exist.
and I don't think it's just the imperative of the state. I think it's our responsibility. I would be willing to sign up and say, hey, here are things that I think the industry can work on. How can we help facilitate that? How can we be the first ones to lead the way, or whatever, whatever that looks like? Because I know it's not going to happen, but I think behavior management should be a standalone service. I think there's too much manipulation of it, and everybody wants a piece of it so they can get the money, but that's the wrong reason to be doing this.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's my thought. I'm going to lose some of those 17 subscribers, Sabrina.
I mean, you're going to go from 32 back to 17. Yeah.
And that's my lucky number. So we're staying there, Okay. The last thing I'm going to touch on before we start to close out, and I made a note, Jennifer, I'm going to cycle back. Residential. So we talked about staff training. One question that I wrote down during my note processing of this is, as we all know, we're going through a DSP crisis, which to me is effectively a residential crisis. And so what do we do as far as best practices go when we have to consistently train people because it's a new DSP every other week? What does that look like for us? Nicole, what have you seen?
This is such a topic that if someone comes up with even a feasible answer, I'm all ears, because this is such a, and truthfully, I don't believe this was because of COVID. I think people like to push that it was COVID. I think there was a DSP shortage well before this for a
5
number
years
of reasons.
before.
Yeah, for a number of reasons, pay, training, etc., or so on. But to who has the answer for that, especially when you come in with cyclical events that you have new staff, you train them, you have new staff, you train them, and how to combat that. I don't think I'll need to process that. I don't have a good answer. I mean, I think about this one often in regards to just the DSP shortage, because ultimately I think it has to do with not just pay, but the supervision and training that they get. They're ill-equipped to go into individuals' homes, their place of community and home. And by virtue of being person-centered trained and trained on the BSP, I go into homes all the time and DSPs will be like, what's a BSP? What is that? So how to really mitigate some of that, I don't have the answer to. I hope someone does at some point,
Fair. I don't either. I'd like to start working with a lot of colleagues to try. Sabrina, what do you think?
Something I've started doing in the past year is I started making video trainings of my BSP. I had to do it. I chose to do it. I chose to do it at a time where I had a client going through a transition, right? And all staff had to be trained. Even though they were the same exact staff, they needed that staff training to complete the transition. And we had like a week, or 5 days, whatever it was. And so I needed to get a bunch of people trained. So I filmed myself reviewing the BSP, just like a podcast here. I would pull up my screen, I would talk about it. I did all these things. I sent it to the house manager. The house manager made sure that it went out to all of her employees, and collected signatures that they had watched it.
That's a dope idea.
It is a really good idea. Very creative.
Never occurred to me once to film it, record it, and then here you go. And then save it. Because if you hire a staff in 3 weeks, text me to make sure it's still relevant. I haven't done an amendment to the plan, and then go for it.
And then always, I tell house managers that if they have a staff who, after that training, it doesn't seem to be clicking, I will set up a meeting with that one person and we'll get into, okay, what are you experiencing? Let's talk about specific examples and how you can use this BSP.
how, Nicole, help me with this. How would that be billable?
I'm looking at 460.
You know, because to me,
I have questions.
go, because I got to think.
I
about it.
mean, I have questions that I haven't formulated in my brain yet. So that's basically where I'm at with that. I think it's a stellar idea. Don't get me wrong. Again, sort of the cynical part of me comes up with a number of questions about billable, comes up with, which this isn't a BC's bag per se, but in the global perspective of DSPs being sufficiently trained, are they being sufficiently trained? Are they in fact getting that training? Sure, they're
They don't get
signing
to
off,
ask
but are
questions.
they? Yes, right. So you blew my mind. You broke my brain a little bit on that. So
No, I love this idea. I think obviously, like with anything, a little refining, right? You know, like I do the initial recording, maybe it's a half hour. They watch that, and then like questions come, and then some way to answer those. And maybe that's a second recording. Theoretically, to me, budgetarily speaking, and this again is not policy. This is just initial thoughts and opinion. It's not policy at SBS or anywhere, but it is reimbursable to train staff. What I see happening with the DSP crisis is I train staff A, then B, then C, then D, then E, and I am billing an excessive amount of that budget on training because I repeatedly have to train people. Or I make one video of the initial, one video of the Q&A. Let's say it took me a half hour a piece. I bill 1 hour total of training, and that video gets played 7 times. And now I've billed 1 hour instead of 7 hours. Some way to refine that and make that just a little bit more concrete. I think that's a great idea, Sabrina. That's fantastic.
but are you billing, you're billing for one person to service other people? Is that not, I mean,
You
know
talking
what I
about
mean?
train
Like,
the trainer?
well, if you train the trainer, sure. But if you've billed Johnny's budget for training his staff, but then you do, well, see, this is where my brain is broken. I'm just going to stop
Well,
right there
I think I know
because
where you're going. So let's say Johnny has a DSP and I go and I drive over and I train Johnny's staff A on the BSP, and we're all good. Train, ask questions, answered it, took me an hour. Everything went fantastic.
right.
And a month later, that individual quits. And now staff B starts. I drive there. I train staff B on the BSP, answers the question. Everything goes great. That took an hour. Now we're at 2 hours. Now, this is a shrewd example. It doesn't always happen like this. And then, staff B quits. So then staff C comes. Now I got to go again. A, it's cumbersome on my time. B, it's cumbersome on the budget. And so I like the concept of utilizing our, advances in technology.
Mhm.
With you record it once, you find out what kinds of questions they
Absolutely.
have, you answer those, even if it's more than an hour. Let's just say it goes up to an hour and a half to do all this. That still to me is less than 3, 5, 7, 10 hours
Separate trainings.
to
Yeah.
train all these, different DSPs. It's just, we got to
It's
find a way
not
to
the
make it.
norm is all. You know what I mean? Like in the years I've been doing this, I have legit never heard of anyone doing this. So that's why it's breaking my brain
Same.
that it seems like such a simple thing to do that it does check the boxes appropriately.
I know
So
exactly the job that I have for Sabrina to refine and then do a video training to teach the BCs how to
I
video
love it.
train the DSPs. We're
I
gonna
logged on to a Zoom meeting from my phone and I muted and turned off the camera on my phone and I talked to myself into a Zoom screen and recorded it.
we're gonna find a way to refine this, and we're gonna run with this idea. I like that idea because it just serves everybody. It helps the BCs, it helps the DSPs, it cuts back on overspending of the budget, which is very imperative.
I still want to emphasize that at the end of that, if I have a staff that is not clicking, it's not happening, I ask the house
For
manager, I'm
sure.
like, please let me come back around and do a second, let's talk about what you're experiencing.
Agreed. I definitely don't think we want to replace the in-person component.
I don't
think-
want to be like, just watch the video again. If there's something you're not getting,
Yeah.
let's talk about it.
Fair,
Let's talk. Yeah.
Definitely never want to replace the in-person component, right? But
Mhm.
this could help at least during the crisis point of turnover with staff, so that we're just not overbilling.
Mhm.
A little bit of mitigation there.
well, I clap for Joaquin, but I'm going to clap for that one too. Like
Mhm.
kudos.
Sabrina gets the credit. That's a great idea, Sabrina, for
I
real.
love
Thank
that
you.
idea.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I want to thank our wonderful panel for coming on to today's episode of IBA's podcast. It's been a very, very great conversation. I appreciate all of your time. I took a bunch of notes, which I'm going to spin my wheels on, because what's starting to happen is stuff that comes out, like Sabrina's idea and some other stuff, turns into a future episode, right? I've currently got up to episode 10 outlined. And so like little by little, they're just rolling out. So this has been great. I would like to go around real quick and see if we have any final thoughts. Starting with you, Nicole, if you have any final thoughts on today's best practices, a like, a dislike, a takeaway, what you
I'm
got?
going to go with the takeaway. And my takeaway is we're all working towards the common goal. Everyone within our industry is working towards a common goal, and how we might get to the end, the finish line, wherever that's at. And then pursuing on can look different for everyone, but we all need to be communicating. We all need to be trying to do best practices, trying to advocate for our individuals, and that advocates for their budget and their services that they're delivered. And just work as a team to do those things, because from the individual to the case manager, however the IST is defined, we all just need to work together.
Fair enough. Sabrina, what's your final thought?
My takeaway from this has been that there were a lot of things that I accepted as this was just part of the job. This is just how it was done. And I consider myself to be somebody who thinks critically and asks questions, but I can't catch everything. And there's definitely been some things that have been brought to my attention that I don't know that I was doing best practices, and I want to be doing best practices. But if I don't get the opportunity to see what other people are doing, right? If you don't broaden your worldview, then you don't know what you don't know.
Don't know what you don't know. Fair enough. Jennifer, co-host, what final thought do you have today on best practices?
Just kind of going off of what Sabrina said, I think way back when I first started as a BC, I thought I was doing best practices, and then come to find out I'd been taught things I probably shouldn't be doing. And it took just experience and us moving around a little bit, and like just broadening our horizons and being critical thinkers and looking at things ethically, through the ethical lens, right? Just trying to figure out, questioning things. I think, we're always questioning, always learning, always trying to be better. So I find this kind of stuff really motivational. So I think it was a really good discussion, and I like it.
I love it. Thank you. I think for me, the big thing that I take away, and I want everybody else, who watches this and to take away is transparency. Because like what Sabrina said, what Jennifer said, you don't know what you don't know. This service is being delivered in every corner of the state. And what we've learned through just experience and happenstance is like what's happening in Valparaiso differs from Fort Wayne, differs from Indy, from Lafayette to Evansville. And when I came to that conclusion, I think concretely, and I was like, it shouldn't be different. And so how are we going to effectuate consistency? We got to start talking, and we got to start telling the truth, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. We have to start telling the truth, and we have to start talking, and then we come together and we find a way to make it better. And that's like Nicole said, the goal is to, at the end of the day, to actually work together and make it better. Even if there's speed bumps, even if some of it gets ugly, we need to get to where it's better, because better is going to be for our families, our friends, our community. And so that's my takeaway. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank for all 17 subscribers for watching our episode. And if anybody watches and, has a takeaway from this, please throw it into the comments. If you have a different opinion, if you heard something and you're like, Joaquin is completely wrong, I might be, email me, tell me about it. Come on the show. Let's talk about it. I don't know what I don't know either. So I'm here to have conversation. Email me at joaquinorozco.behavior@gmail.com, because I love my free Gmails. And we will see y'all next week. Next week, we are going to have an open discussion on the DSP crisis. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And thank you much. And we are going to close out.